Sergei Aleshkov, the 6-year-old soldier, outsmarted everyone in World War II. World War II had 70 million soldiers, but did you know that one of them was only 6 years old? While most kids were figuring out how to ride bikes, Sergei Aleshkov was dodging bullets. This is the wild story of a kindergartner who traded snack time for frontline battles. Born in 1934 in the village of Gurn, now the Ulyanovsk district of Kaluga Oblast, Sergei Aleshkov had a normal childhood. Well, until Hitler showed up. His father had died before the war, and his older brothers, Ivan and Andrei, had enlisted in the army, leaving Sergei and his brother Peter and their mother behind. By 1941, Sergei was just a kid helping his mom around the house, unaware that things were about to go full-on Call of Duty. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, Sergei's hometown became a war zone. While out picking berries one day, Sergei found himself in the middle of a bombing raid. The Luftwaffe, apparently not satisfied with just dropping bombs, also tore his world apart when his mother and brother Peter were executed by the Nazis in front of him due to their links with their partisans. With nothing left but fear and survival instincts, little Sergei ran into the forest. After days in the wilderness, living off forest berries, Sergei was rescued by a group of Soviet soldiers. These guys were used to rescuing comrades, not kids barely old enough to hold a spoon. But Sergei had spunk, so they took him in. The 142nd Guards Regiment figured Sergei could be more than just a mascot. They taught him to march. Though with his tiny legs, for every one step the soldiers took, he had to take two, so he was basically always jogging. And when they said basic training, they weren't handing out glue sticks and glitter. Pretty soon Sergei was delivering messages under fire. You'd think dodging bullets would be tough for a 6-year-old, but being small has its perks. He was harder to hit. Sergei's debut on the battlefield came during the Battle of Stalingrad. One day, the regiment was under attack and Sergei was given his first assignment, delivering a message across a battlefield that looked like a set from a disaster movie. He darted through the ruins, dodging gunfire like a pro. His small size, once a hindrance, made him nearly invisible among the rubble. The soldiers started calling him their secret weapon, though some joked he was just there to confuse the Germans. After all, who expects a kid in the middle of a war zone? Stalingrad was a total nightmare, a frozen, bombed-out city with barely any food or supplies. But Sergei wasn't about to let that stop him. In one of the boldest moves, he volunteered to sneak through the ruins to find a hidden Soviet supply stash. Armed with nothing but a small pistol, he crawled through narrow passages and somehow made it back with the supplies. The soldiers were impressed. Sergei just shrugged. For him, it was another day in the life. In November, things took a turn for the worse when Sergei and his commander found themselves trapped in a bunker under heavy fire. It looked like the game was over, until Sergei spotted a small vent. Now, this wasn't some die-hard situation where Bruce Willis pops out guns blazing. No, this was better. Sergei squeezed through the vent because who else could fit, crawled behind enemy lines, and managed to bring back help to the regiment. By the end of 1942, Sergei's heroism had caught the attention of the Soviet High Command, and they awarded him a Medal of Valor. After the war, Sergei's story didn't end. He went on to join the military for real and lived a long life, dying in 1990 with a well-earned reputation as the Stalingrad Kid. Rumor has it, his last words were something along the lines of, "Well, I did outlast Hitler, didn't I?" Hiroo Onoda, the soldier who didn't know World War II ended. While Sergei was out dodging bullets, there was another soldier who didn't even realize the war was over, decades later. Norio Suzuki wasn't your typical college dropout. In 1974, while most people were chasing careers or settling down, Norio heard an incredible rumor. A Japanese soldier, Hiroo Onoda, still fighting World War II in the Philippine jungle, nearly 30 years after it ended. While everyone else thought it was just a wild story, Norio thought, why not find him? So he packed his bags, fueled by curiosity, and headed off to track down the man who hadn't gotten the memo about the war being over. Onoda was no ordinary soldier. As a lieutenant in the Imperial Japanese Army, he had been assigned to a guerrilla unit on Lubang Island during World War II, with one simple but unbreakable order: never surrender no matter what. Even when Japan officially threw in the towel after the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, Onoda wasn't convinced. Flyers, radio broadcast, he waved them all off as enemy lies, probably thinking, nice try, but I'm not falling for that. For nearly 30 years, Onoda and his dwindling group of comrades lived like ghosts in the jungle. They stole coconuts and rice from villagers, always on the move, never lowering their guard. One by one, his fellow soldiers either surrendered or were killed. But Onoda continued on, still patrolling the jungle, still believing the war hadn't ended. It wasn't just loyalty, it was isolation, fear, and a mind trapped in the past. In so many ways, Onoda wasn't just fighting a war, he was fighting time itself. By 1974, Onoda was the last man standing, still carrying out a war that had long been reduced to history books. Enter Norio Suzuki, just one guy with a backpack and an unwavering belief that he could find the forgotten soldier. And find him he did. After only 4 days in the jungle, Suzuki stumbled upon Onoda, rifle in hand, still wearing his tattered uniform, a living relic of a world that had moved on without him. But convincing Onoda that the war was truly over? Easier said than done. After decades of survival, paranoia had become second nature. He wasn't about to surrender just because a stranger from the future said so. Onoda needed official orders, the kind that had kept him in the jungle for nearly 3 decades. So what did Suzuki do? He went back to Japan, found Onoda's old commanding officer, Major Yoshimi Taniguchi, who by then had long retired and was probably not expecting a knock on the door about one of his wartime soldiers, and brought him all the way to Lubang. Only after hearing it directly from Taniguchi, face to face, did Onoda finally lay down his arms. On March 10, 1974, Hiroo Onoda surrendered, handing over his sword, rifle, and no joke, 500 rounds of ammunition, just in case anyone thought he wasn't serious. Onoda returned to Japan a hero, though one can only imagine his shock at seeing just how much the world had changed in 30 years. Maybe the biggest adjustment wasn't even that the war was over, but that people were now obsessed with disco and bell-bottoms. And Norio? Well, he went on to keep chasing legends, but finding a soldier who had outlasted an entire war, that's one for the history books. The Ghost Army. World War II had some of the most brutal battles in history, but not every unit relied on bullets and bombs. Some soldiers fought with nothing but inflatable tanks and a good sense of theater. Meet the Ghost Army, an elite group of 1,100 men, whose mission was simple: trick the Nazis into thinking they were facing entire divisions, when in reality, all they were up against were rubber tanks, loudspeakers, and a lot of imagination. Officially known as the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, this tactical deception unit was activated in January 1944. They arrived in Europe just in time for D-Day and spent the next year putting on a traveling roadshow of fake military operations. Their job was to make Hitler's forces believe Allied troops were in one place, while the real units were elsewhere, planning their next move. Basically, they bought time for the real soldiers by creating convincing distractions. Think of them as the world's most dangerous improv group. The Ghost Army didn't just trick the enemy, they staged entire fake battles. Inflatable tanks and artillery were set up to look real enough for enemy planes to spot. Fake radio conversations made it sound like thousands of troops were on the move, while sound trucks played recordings of tanks rumbling and soldiers marching. To make the act even more convincing, some soldiers hung out in local cafes, casually spreading fake information for enemy spies to overhear. Over the course of the war, these artists, actors, and sound engineers staged more than 20 deception operations in France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and Germany, often right on the front lines. In one of their final missions, they pulled off a massive bluff along the Rhine, a stunt so convincing that it saved thousands of lives by diverting German troops away from the actual attack. It was the ultimate performance, but the stakes were much higher than any theater production. In their downtime, these soldiers, mostly recruited from art schools, sketched and painted their way across Europe, leaving behind a visual record of their journey. Turns out, some battles were fought with paintbrushes as well as rubber tanks. Nikolai Morozov, the oldest World War II sniper. While most people of his age were settling into a quiet retirement, Nikolai Morozov, at 87, decided to head to the front lines in 1942. Born in 1854, this man had seen the fall of empires, revolutions, and a century of upheaval, and it still wasn't done. When the siege of Leningrad hit, he volunteered because why not add sniper to his already impressive resume? He managed to get at least 10 confirmed kills, proving that age is just a number when it comes to taking down Nazis. Morozov didn't just wake up one day and decide to become a hero. Long before World War II, he was causing trouble for the establishment. Born an illegitimate child of a landowner, he still got into the best schools, only to rebel against their rigid curriculum. By his 20s, he was joining revolutionary movements, crossing paths with Karl Marx, and becoming a thorn in the side of the Russian government. His revolutionary work got him exiled, imprisoned, and marked as a wanted man. No big deal. While in prison, he didn't waste time. Instead, he studied sciences, physics, chemistry, and even astronomy. After 25 years, he got out, but rather than relaxing, he kept teaching and even became one of Russia's earliest pilots. When Germany invaded in 1941, Morozov wasn't going to sit this one out. After being repeatedly denied enlistment, he threatened to bring it up with Stalin himself. The army finally let him join, but only for a month. He spent that time sniping Germans on the Volkhov front at 87. Let that sink in. After the war, Morozov was showered with medals, including the Order of Lenin. He died at 92, 1 year after the war ended. Today, his name is immortalized not just in history, but in the form of an asteroid and a crater on the moon. Because if anyone deserves to have their name in space, it's the 87-year-old sniper who wouldn't take no for an answer. Churchill once said, "Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts." And if anyone knew about courage, it was these guys. Whether it was fighting Nazis with a toy-sized pistol or continuing a war that ended 30 years ago. Their stories show that true courage is the will to keep going, no matter the odds. If they faced down World War II, maybe our daily battles aren't so impossible after all.